Welcome to Liberty FM, the podcast dedicated to all things New York Liberty. I'm Felicia, and I'm joined by my co-host Francois. This week, the Libs had 3 games, winning the first 2 at home and losing 1 on the road. Watching all 3 games, the question that comes up for us is, when things aren't going the Liberty's way, can they switch gears to get over the hump? Francois, let's get into it.
Let's get into it. And to answer your question, I would say yes and no. Yes, because last Sunday they were able to overcome a 16-point deficit against the Atlanta Dream with Sabrina under the weather and, gutted it out and finding a way to win this game. Then on Tuesday, they, fought and managed to overcome a team like the Minnesota Lynx that had beat them twice, one pretty badly in the regular season in Minnesota and the second time around in the Commissioner's Cup final. And they find ways to, find adjustments, to read plays better in order to change things. We knew that Jonquel Jones was a player that really struggled in the 2 matchups against the Lynx, and the ability to put her in a better position to succeed from her teammates was something that was really great to see, as well as the defense in the fourth quarter that limited the Lynx incredibly. But unfortunately, I could also say no, Felicia, because sadly, as we're recording the podcast today, the Liberty blew their chances against a Fever team that, is on the come up, but there were things that were avoidable. So where do you want us to start, Felicia? The good or the bad?
Well, let's start with the good. Let's go back a little bit. I think, with the Atlanta and Minnesota games, for Atlanta, Stewie came up big for the team. She led all scorers with 22 points and 12 rebounds. She had a good game. Her averages are still a little shaky. But I think she did what she could to gut it out for the team, and everyone contributed, and it was a great comeback. Atlanta, I think one of the things that you're seeing now in this season is that you're getting into the middle of the season. Teams are figuring things out. Teams don't want to be at the bottom. So people are starting to scrap and fight to get wins. Early on, everybody kind of came out punching. The big teams came out punching. They you saw Connecticut. Connecticut was holding the number 1 spot for a while. And, the Liberty were right there. You saw Minnesota. The Aces looked shaky, but you figured Chelsea Gray's not there. When she gets back, they'll get on a roll again and they'll be okay. And you saw Seattle, Phoenix. There were a lot of changes. So even for some of these teams that you might say are quote-unquote bottom teams, nobody likes losing. At some point, you're going to switch gears to try to figure out how to gut out a win, no matter who the team you're playing against. And so that's what you're seeing here with teams like Atlanta and then even today Indiana. But you see it in games where you see the Washington Mystics. Look how many games they lost before they got there first. And since then, even if they've lost games, they're not losing games by a lot. Like these teams who are even considered quote-unquote bottom teams, they're not getting blown out. They're really trying to fight and really grind it out. So I think for the Liberty and, some of these top teams, we've seen some of them struggle as of late. And I think that is just part of the season now. Everyone's sort of ramping up and figuring things out. But now is the time for these top teams to kick it into high gear. Like if you want to win, you got to now kick this into high. Granted, the Olympic break is coming up, so you only have a few games. Hopefully when everyone comes back, you're ready to kick it into high gear. But you see all these teams are starting to come up. All these teams are starting to ramp up. What do? You have to change gears now to show that you're worthy to get it to the finals again.
I mean, in a way, the Liberty did change gear because the way they approached the Minnesota game, right, it almost felt like a playoff game, really. Mm-hmm. They really wanted this game, and it was very telling because Sabrina Ionescu was still fairly sick.
Was sick.
She was like, I mean, we saw when we were at the stadium, like, every time there was a little pause or timeout or like...
She was breathing hard.
She was breathing hard. But she knew that it was an important game for the Liberty psychologically because, you know, you lost the first game against Minnesota by 17 points. You lost the Commissioner's Cup, even though it wasn't really in your, you know, in your arena. It was still considered a home game, and you lost an important game, you know, financially for you and mentally. So I felt like the way they approached the game against Minnesota definitely showed that they changed gear, and they wanted to show that when things matter, they can step up. And we had questioned Sandy Brandello's choices or a lack of ability to adapt to certain situations. And I would say in the Minnesota game, they did. If you look right from the get-go, the first play that the Liberty played against Minnesota, even though it led to Betnijah Laney's turnover, you know, from the get-go, they had a pick and roll with Stewie, between Stewie and Vandersloot. Meanwhile, Sabrina was setting a screen for JJ to, you know, make her available in the paint to have more space because she had kind of struggled against the tough defense from Atlanta Smith. So this intention in finding JJ, I thought was very good from the Liberty because you cannot have one of your best players only scoring 3 points in the Commissioner's Cup final, and then I think it was 4 points in the Minnesota game. And so that was great to see. And then when Minnesota, you know, it's still a tough team to beat. Even though you start to figure things out, they always find a way to adapt and make your life very difficult. So the ball movements, the screens, the centers that are cutting to the baskets, the ability to, you know, force you, you know, to switch, but, you know, you have to really step up your switching if you want to, you know, make sure that, you know, Courtney Williams or Mike Bright don't score, you know, outside shots. While the Liberty, despite, you know, the challenge, they stepped up. And, you know, in that fourth quarter against the Minnesota Lynx, where, you know, the Lynx were a little ahead, the way they turned things around in that quarter, with the help of the crowd as well.
Yeah.
The 12th roster spot, the Barclays Center. You know, they show a grit that I felt was missing from that team that a lot of people were questioning. What did you make of that turnaround in the fourth quarter against the Lynx that really showed character from the Liberty?
Well, the one thing I will give to Sandy is that she inserted Fiebich. Leo. And in that fourth quarter, you have to admit, like, the lineup she had for the fourth quarter, which included Fiebich, that is what turned the game around for them. Defensively, you know, you saw what the Liberty can do and that they can be better. And they have to remain locked in. And when they do, good things come and good things will happen. You know, when you get away from that is when it starts to get real shaky and teams can take advantage. But in this game, you can tell they had a chip on their shoulder.
Yeah.
Like, you can tell that they wanted this game so badly just because, obviously, Minnesota had already whooped them the first game pretty handedly. And then the Commissioner's Cup, Minnesota still had the advantage. And there was a lot of switching that just really killed the Liberty. And in this game, I believe in the second half, Sandy said, they did a lot less switching, which helped and which went in their favor. And I think that's something that the Liberty need to adapt to. That I know they love to switch, but sometimes for certain teams that are quick and that can speed you up, you might want to really think through if that's a good thing to be doing all the time in a game. Because as we know, as we always say, this can be a game of runs. And sometimes when the Liberty switch, I always feel like when the Liberty do switch, there's someone always lost. Someone is always lost.
Yeah.
If it's too much, someone gets lost. and it could be any one of them. That's the thing. Like, I'm not going to say it's just Sabrina getting lost or anything like that. That's not the case. Sometimes it's Betnijah. Sometimes it's been Stewie. Like, you see it when they do it too much, and when teams speed them up in the switching, someone's always lost, which means for the opposing team, someone is wide open, either cutting to the basket or open at the three. Someone's getting a shot against the Liberty. So in this game, you could see that they really locked in, and to keep Minnesota to just 8 points in the fourth quarter is amazing.
Yeah, I think they didn't score for almost was it 8 or 9 minutes that they didn't score?
Towards the end. They didn't score a bucket till the very end, but by that point, that was just the bench players had come on at that point and someone scored a bucket. But by that time, the game was over. So really, they only scored 6 points in that quarter.
But to add to what you're saying, I think it's a question of intensity. Yeah. Nobody's questioning, obviously, the talent of the New York Liberty when you have players like Sabrina Ionescu, Jonquel Jones, Stewie. All of them are going to be in the WNBA All-Star game in Phoenix at the end of July. But it's the way they put intensity in the game and everything they do. As a comparison in regards to turnovers, for example, they had 20 turnovers in the Commissioner's Cup final. Out of those 20 turnovers, it was 14 unforced errors. So it's this sort of casualness that sometimes, kind of linger with the Liberty, where they don't make the effort. We know that you guys are good, but you have to give 100% every single time and for 4 quarters. I think I heard in one of the spaces on X that they don't think they've seen the Liberty so far this season putting 4 consistent quarters in the game. There's always a time where one quarter, whether it's the second, the third, or the fourth, there's always at least one quarter where the Liberty are kind of derailing. And we haven't seen a 40 minutes full-on Liberty basketball performance that we expect from them. So that's intensity. That's the way you prepare yourself mentally for a game. And we saw in the fourth quarter against Minnesota that they're capable. Like you said, Sandy decided to do less switchings because with the teams like Minnesota, it's really hard. I think the only switching that they were doing, it was with Fiebich and Stewie, because let's be honest, with a player like Fiebich, we have a diamond on our hand with Fiebich. This athlete is exceptional. I mean, I don't think people really realize how lucky the Liberty were to have a player of that talent who's a rookie, not the regular rookie because of her experience in Europe, but you have someone that can literally defend on any position. Yeah. She had the ability to switch with Stewie and end up at times against Courtney Williams and then at times on Nafisa Collier. Who in this league can have the ability to defend on 2 very distinct players from the guards to the forward or center? I think, I was always amazed during that quarter. I was sometimes just focusing on Fiebich when we were at the Barclays, and it was just exceptional. And I think it rubs off on other people too, because when you see someone giving 100% like that and able to defend on anybody, then it has to impact you. And I think the whole team overall had a chip on their shoulder and showed that they can, have that intensity to win games. Unfortunately, as we're going to see later on with the Indiana Fever matchup, it's not always the case.
I think for the Liberty, going into the Olympic break, even though a couple of the players will be in Paris, it will be good. Maybe it will be a good break for them to kind of... I
mean, it's not going to be for all of them, though. Because
it's not for all of them.
We're going to have a lot of players going to the Olympics.
It's not for all of them, because when you think about it, if Sabally is healthy, if she is better, I guess, by the Olympic start, she'll play for Germany, as will Fiebich. Stewie and Sab for USA. Am I missing anyone?
I don't think you do. No.
You have 4 players. One who has been injured, so we haven't really seen much of Sabally lately. But 3 who are very critical to the Liberty continuing, dominance in the league at this point. And right now, that dominance hangs by a thread because obviously Connecticut is right behind them, as is Minnesota. And you can't forget about teams like Seattle or Vegas. They are all coming up and they're all winning their games and they're all scrapping and fighting for these wins. And so the Liberty, really, this time off, I think may be good, even for somebody like JJ, to just get some time off, get her head back in these games. Because I think for JJ, she is a critical point, and as we've always said, she is crucial to this team being able to get a title. Yes, the contributions of Stewie and Sab and everyone, it's important. But when JJ does not have the ball in her hands and you limit her, and teams know this, if you can limit her or get in her head and get her out of the game, you get the Liberty out of the game. Because if JJ does not score, or she has very little scoring, unfortunately, Stewie's shooting is not compensating for that. So without JJ, they're not winning it, period.
Yeah, and so let's talk about, JJ and the matchup against the Indiana Fever. I think, when we were talking about, this upcoming game against Indiana, we knew that it was definitely not going to be like the first 3 games that we had against them. 2 blowouts at home at the Barclays Center, and then one where we won fairly comfortably by 11, I think, if I'm not mistaken, even though the gap was much bigger in the game and the Indiana made a little comeback, but it was just too late. So 3 comfortable wins, but it was early on in the season. The schedule of the Fever was horrendous, playing so many games with very little rest, and facing some of the toughest team in the league, playing the Liberty 3 times, the Aces, Connecticut 2 or 3 times as well. So a really, really tough schedule. And we saw over the last maybe 2 or 3 weeks, we've seen a lot of growth from this team, and they start to figure things out offensively. I think, the connection between Caitlin Clark and Aaliyah Boston is getting there. Aaliyah is more involved offensively. I think defensively, they're a better team. The contribution of Alexia Hall, who's a very good defender, also helps the team. So, things are starting to get in their way. They beat the Phoenix Mercury in Phoenix. They caused some problems to the Aces, even though in the end they crumbled in the 4th quarter. So we've seen improvements. So I knew that this last matchup of the regular season against them was going to be much tougher than any other game that we faced against them. And rightfully so, because that first quarter, the way the Fever started this game, they were hungry. Sabrina Ionescu at the end of the game, and I don't know why it sort of created a bit of controversy online, but she basically said that it was their Super Bowl for the Fever. It was meaning the biggest game for them, facing the top team in the league. And so you could tell on the court they were hungry, they were running, everything was going their way, and I think they were able to, look at what is going to work for them against the Liberty. And what worked for them? Playing fast. We know that the Liberty are struggling on transition defense. More into that in the second. And also playing with Aaliyah Boston. JJ, she made it hard for her and Alyssa Smith. But we saw that, Aaliyah Boston, she's got some really nice post move. And once she decided to attack JJ, it was hard for JJ to stop her. So they used those things, and Caitlin Clark, that is starting to figure things out in this league. So the tempo in the first quarter was really high, and you felt like the Liberty were just not ready. It's like you think you just have to show up, and you're the top team in the league, and you beat the Fever, quite a few times, that you don't have to show up. That first quarter was not good at all. Well, what did you make of how the Liberty approached that game?
Yeah, from watching the first quarter, you knew this was going to be interesting, because the way the Liberty played, you can tell, Indiana was the hungry team here. They played faster, they got to the ball a lot faster, a lot quicker. The Liberty may have played their style of basketball, but it was too slow because Indiana was able to pick them apart a little bit. And yeah, Caitlin Clark is an amazing player still, even as a rookie, and she'll only get better, so you have to really put great defenders on her. She's going to cook Sloot. She's going to cook Fiebich. You got to keep Betnijah. And if Betnijah not in there, you need KT. It's not, she's going to get shots off. They're not going to completely, keep her locked up, but they can minimize the damage. And others just can't do that. And they're just not quick enough when against Clark. So, and with her passing ability, if you can't handle Clark, you're cooked on anyone else because her passing ability is elite already. Yes. And you have to respect it.
I think, we could argue that Caitlin Clark has a lot of turnovers, that she's not necessarily able to shoot, to be as effective from the free-point line as she was in college. But one thing where she's going to really succeed is her passing ability and the way to serve others on a team. Her passing ability is amazing. So if everything else doesn't necessarily work, that she could have that side of the game. She's going to find the
open man. Yeah. She's always going to find the open man, and her passing is elite. So you have to be prepared for that. And I just think the Liberty just look a step behind Indiana, and they didn't have the same intensity they had against Minnesota or even for the comeback against Atlanta. They just didn't have the same intensity, and they played, I feel like lazy is such a strong word, but that's what it felt like. It felt like they're being lazy out there. Like you don't know. At one point you saw just transition defense alone.
I think that was definitely the biggest issue.
They were taking a lot of threes for really no reason when your points were coming in the paint, and you kept waiting and standing around, waiting for somebody to get open from three. And the paint, there's no one in the paint. You would see everybody at the top of the key lined up. Stewie's not even attempting to try to get to the paint. JJ's not. I don't know what the play was, but there were too many occasions where you could just freeze it. You could freeze the game, and everybody was near the three-point line. Nobody was going into the paint. Nobody was cutting, nothing. And it just became stagnant, which you just feed into Indiana's hands. And also, when you're missing that many threes, by the time that ball bounces up, half the Indiana team is already down the floor. And you're just slowly jogging up. And Caitlin with her passing, as crisp and as quick as her passing is, you even saw moments when the Liberty started to get into it and started to take the lead. You saw Betnijah shouting at people get back. And it was just at this point, she shouldn't have to shout at you to get back on defense. They're playing quick. They're trying to stay in this. But the one thing for me in this game that stood out the most was the start of was somewhere in the third quarter, not the start of the third quarter. But there was a play where, on the missed opportunity by Indiana, Jonquel got the rebound. And she was frustrated.
Oh, yes.
She was frustrated. You could just see in her body language she was frustrated. She had the ball, but then essentially as she went to pass it, she missed Aaliyah Boston that was basically coming up right behind her. And no one told JJ that she was there. She didn't even know. It was just as she passed the ball, Aaliyah came over, managed to get the steal, and they reset the play. So Indiana came back, and they ended up scoring a three.
Yeah.
And on that play, it just felt like JJ just stopped playing. She got so frustrated, she just stood there and just stopped playing. And I was just you can't even in the frustration, even if, yes, we got some really whack WNBA referees, but even in those moments, you can't let the referees get in your head. Yeah. You can't, because you're still playing until that whistle blows.
Exactly.
You still have to play.
The game is still on.
It's still on. And it just felt like at that moment, Indiana took control. And Indiana got the motivation they needed, and they took that into the fourth quarter, And that's how they got the win, because she stopped playing. Because then you saw, even for us, we're yelling at the screen. I was like, JJ needs to sit. JJ needs to sit for a while. I know she needs to get in the paint. She needs points, but she needs to sit. Her mind is not in this game right now. She is more of a liability than a help to the team right now. And she sat the first couple minutes of the fourth quarter. I don't know if that maybe Sandy was just kind of helping her cool off a bit, get your mind back. But it just seemed like after that, she just wasn't fully into the game. Maybe part of that is the frustration, not getting fed the ball. But also, you're not making yourself available. And I don't know if that's a coaching thing of the plays that you're trying to set, or it's just JJ like not rolling to the basket. There was nowhere in the fourth quarter where I really saw them playing in the paint and playing for JJ or even Stewie. Like, they were all really just settling for the 3-point ball. And that, to me, with the 3-point percentage they had today, which was horrible, and you were doing so much better in the paint, you should know, like, you need to fight. You need to claw. You need to get in the paint. You can draw fouls, like something. And it just felt like they were just always a step behind and just complacent.
Yeah, I mean, you're right on the money with all the things that you shared. I mean, just to look back at, the field goal percentage of the Liberty in this game, they were 19 for 29 when it comes to shooting twos. But when it came to the free-point line, they were 10 for 42. 42 attempts from the arc in this game, and you only made 10 of them.
Yeah.
That is not going to make you win a game.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing, and it's not the first time it's happening that the Liberty are not shooting well from the free, and they just keep keep trying when it's not working. Mm-hmm. And the lack of ability to kind of like move away from that. And what is crazy is that in this game against Atlanta, they've done things that were working. Every time they attacked the basket or had a mid-range shot,
that worked.
You had Stewie attacking and provoking a lot of fouls. She went at the free throw line. She had 10 attempts at the free throw line. The few times where JJ had the ball, she was dominant as well. We had a great game from Betnijah Laney that unfortunately, didn't get the win. But, up until that game, when Betnijah scored 20 points or more, the Liberty with this roster were 9-0. And so it's the first time with this squad that they lose a game when Betnijah Laney scored at least 20 points. Mm-hmm. And Betnijah Laney, we were frustrated in some of the last few games, but that was the best game in a while. And everything that she was doing up until that play, unfortunately, at the end where she bounced the ball on her foot, everything she did today was on point. Yeah. She didn't force shots, at the free-point line. She was
decisive.
She was the only one that actually made threes consistently, and she was the only player in the team that was over 50% in this game. But she did everything right. When she was open for a free, she made those shots. She also, had a pump fake and settled for mid-range instead, attacked the basket. Everything that she did today was perfect up until that last play, unfortunately. But the Liberty, the lack of ability to see that the 3 points is not going to cut it for today, and you have to do something else. That was very frustrating. And I think it's on Sandy to tell him, listen, I know we have open shots because a lot of them were open shots, but it's not getting in. So we need to do something else. Yeah. And, the few times where they would make those threes or, have those mid-range, the transition defense, and that's not the first time that the Liberty are really struggling when it comes to transition defense. You have sometimes some players in the other team that literally decide to go right to the basket, whether they consider a basket or not. Mm-hmm. The first thing they do is just get into the basket. And one of the turning points of the game, not only was the turnover from JJ when she was complaining to the ref was a turning point, but the key part was that play where the Liberty, I think it was when Sandy decided to take a timeout with 7 seconds left on the clock for the offense. She saw that it wasn't getting anywhere, so she decided to take a timeout. Yeah. They had a play And I think, they missed the shot, if I'm not mistaken. Correct me if I'm wrong. And the first thing you saw, if you look at Tiffany Mitchell, she didn't care whether the ball went... Kelsey Mitchell, sorry. She didn't care whether the ball went in or not. She went straight to the basket. And then when we rewatched that play, you look at Sabrina. She's sort of coming back on defense, but she has this lapse on her lateral vision where she kind of looked like both sides. But she was literally the only defender or the closest defender to Kelsey Mitchell, and she didn't see her. And then who passed the ball to Kelsey Mitchell?
Yeah, it was
Caitlin Clark, and she tied the game.
I mean, and the wild part even about that is the fact that Sabrina was the one that took the shot. So really, one of your teammates should have been down there before you. One of your other teammates should have been down there since you were the person taking the shot. It happened to be Sabrina. Sabrina clearly didn't see Kelsey Mitchell in time. And that again, they just looked a step behind Indiana. And it is hard. Yes, you beat Indiana three times. This is the fourth game. It's hard to do a full sweep of a team because they don't want that. They also are going to have a chip on their shoulder because you beat them 3 times, just like we said with them with the Liberty in Minnesota. They want to win even. And listen, Indiana, they're not bottom of the bottom here. Like, what are they, 7th or 8th at this point? They're kind of toying with the 7th and 8th spot, kind of going back and forth, I think, between them and Chicago, I believe.
Well, now with Atlanta losing last night, Chicago is 7th and Indiana is 8th. So they're really fighting for a playoff spot.
They're fighting for that playoff spot. You're halfway into the season. You don't want to have any more slips because obviously these teams have lost a lot of games early on. Now they're putting things together and they want to put wins together. They want to put quality wins together and they're figuring it out. Their coaches are figuring it out. And so for the Liberty, this is their time to really try to find that next gear. And I think it is there, but they need to show it for every single game. It doesn't matter if it's a bottom team or, we've beaten this team this many times. No, it has to be for every game. If you are going to win and you want to win a championship, you have to have that mentality like you had against Minnesota and even to some degree Atlanta. But especially that fourth quarter, that locked in that we saw from the Liberty. Yes, the Barclays Center is the 12th man and the crowd really helped. But the way they locked into that is the intensity you need to have 4 quarters. Not just 1 quarter out of the game, all 4 quarters in order to really get there. Because if you have these lapses, other teams are going to take advantage and you'll miss your shot at a championship.
Yeah, so to go back to the question that you initially asked at the beginning of the podcast, if, the Liberty have what it takes. I mean, you look at Sandy Brandello and what she said after the game. She said, I didn't think we came out with the necessary urgency to compete. Indiana has gotten better and better with every game they play. We turn it around quickly, but we missed a lot of shots, have some turnovers we'd like back. So, she said we didn't come up with the necessary urgency. And when you look at, the fourth quarter, I mean, the Liberty still had that game. They were up 75-68 with, a few minutes left and ended up losing by 6. It is concerning. It is concerning that you let this game away. They lost by 5, sorry. That you let this game away when, you should have killed this game.
A lot of it, though, comes down to the poor decision-making. They started going back to shooting threes and thinking the 3-ball was going to save them. Just because somebody, Betnijah made one, Sabrina made one, they were doing well. Like, Sabrina and Betnijah did well in this game. But if you can't feed your bigs, and if your bigs aren't going to the paint, like setting plays to feed JJ, like to let her battle it out in the paint and possibly get a foul call, possibly go to the line. Like when you take all of that away and you just settle for just who can get open from 3, you're not going to do much. And every time you miss, you give Indiana that opportunity to go on a fast break. to get downfield because you're not doing it. You're not fast enough to get back on transition defense like you need to. So for the Liberty, it was a lackluster performance. They can do better. We have seen just stretches where they can be locked in. We haven't seen it for all 4 quarters in a game. And that's the next part they need to tie together. Is how do we do it not just for 2 quarters in a game, but more than 2 quarters? Can you do it for all 4? Can you do it for 3 even? Because sometimes you see, like usually it was like the first and the fourth quarter, they're the strongest. Second and third, they get a little. But this time, it was the second and third where they were strong. Yeah. But where they needed to finish was in the fourth quarter, and they didn't do that.
Yeah, I mean, they stopped executing the plays that were successful. And I think at some point it comes down to coaching. Yeah. I know that Sandy likes to let her players take responsibilities and figure things out. But I think maybe she should have taken some timeouts a little quicker in the fourth and, say, hey, guys, like, we need to revert back to what was successful and stop shooting those threes, whether we open or not. Every time you guys attack the basket, like, you're successful most of the time. So that was disappointing. And so I hope that, next week they will rectify things. There's still a lot of tough games ahead before the Olympic break. On Wednesday, they're going to face Connecticut for a camp day game at 11 a.m. And then the following day, back-to-back, they're playing at home against the Chicago Sky team that is causing quite a bit of problems lately to some certain teams. They lost a few games, but they made it tough for the Minnesota Lynx. They battled it out with the Aces before, coming down in the fourth. They won in Seattle a couple of days ago. And you got, Angel Reese, double-double machine, Kennedy Carter that is, balling right now. So you're going to have 2 interesting matchups against the Sky. And then the week after that, you finish with a game at home against Connecticut. So twice you're going to face Connecticut and twice Chicago Sky. And that's going to be interesting. I was saying to you that, overall in the last stretch before the Olympic break, that I would see the Liberty winning most of the game and maybe losing one. I didn't necessarily expect that loss to be against Indiana. I was expecting more maybe against Connecticut. But now with that loss, you got to win all those games before the break to maintain that lead at the top of the WNBA, because otherwise, it's going to lift a bit of fitting and people are going to keep questioning whether you could, take it all the way. You were saying, like, before we started recording the podcast about the use of the bench. We just, we didn't talk about it. But we had talked about in previous podcasts, the New York Liberty decided to get Jaylyn Sherrod on a 7-day contract. That would probably be renewable and eventually turn into an end of the season contract. But we knew from what Jonathan Cobb had said at the beginning of the season that they would try to look for eventually a 12th player beginning on July 6th for someone that didn't have any experience or up to 2 years of experience. And then eventually July 14th for someone with 3 years of experience or more. And then eventually after the Olympics with someone with more experience. But when you look at the market, there's not really a lot of players with WNBA experience that are available or would bring like a really, something to the team. So, and then Maureen Johannes, who's not going to come after the Olympics. So your choices were limited, and it kind of made sense that you would, go back to Sherrod with what she showed in the preseason, her defense, her ability to attack the baskets, and, the versatility that she offers, and also the versatility that you already have in your roster. Yeah. And the fact that you don't necessarily utilize Dojkic that much recently made me think that Jaylyn Sherrod had a shot. Is she gonna play? That's a different story, though. What do you think?
She needs to. I mean, she offers speed, and something that the Liberty are missing. She offers more speed. The thing is, on this team, when you have teams that are pretty quick and technical, you need someone. It's hard because, she's a rookie as well. So you can't put all the responsibility on her shoulders. That's not fair.
That's what we were saying the other day, that you don't.
It's not fair to do that to her. But I'm sure this is her chance to really show what she can do. But again, I'm not going to go into this like she's the savior or anything for this team. I just think she's an added piece to maybe help bring a spark to the team.
Yeah.
And hopefully that can get everybody involved and involved in a better way. You know, if with her playing, I think Sandy really needs to trust her bench more. She needs to put Fiebich out there. Even in today's game, you didn't bring Fiebich at all.
I don't think she played in the fourth quarter.
I don't know that I don't recall her playing in the second half. Like, so you just limit her because obviously, yeah, against Caitlin, it's tough. Okay, well then stop doing as much switching. Like, again, you keep Betnijah on her. You keep KT if Betnijah's not in the game. Like, stop doing as much switching. You did that with Minnesota. When you realized there was too many switches, you started to limit that. So it left only somebody, like if Stewie switched, the only person she's switching with is Fiebich, who has length. Here, you know, with Caitlin, you need to keep somebody like Betnijah or KT on her at all times. Nobody else, really. But that doesn't mean Fiebich should sit the bench. Like, you needed length, and you didn't get that. And you needed somebody who could also potentially open up the floor and, you know, possibly make a three or drive to the basket. She's also very strong and can do that. So, you know, if Sandy's not going to play her bench, you're going to have problems going down the stretch. You are, because you may talk about, you know, Dojkic. She's up and down for me, so I can see why she doesn't play her as often. But she also has speed. She may not always make the best decisions, but she has speed to keep up with other players. You know, Sloot coming back. Yes, Sloot has speed, but defensively, yeah, she's a liability. She offers a way for things to be settled down as the general. You can see that when she's carrying the ball up, it alleviates Sabrina in a way, which is good. So for me, starting Sloot is not a problem. But I think what you have to do is if you start Sloot, then you take her out a little bit earlier and you start Fiebich, you start the bench. So that way, yeah, she'll come in here in spurts. But Fiebich should have more minutes than Sloot, for sure. People like Burke should have more minutes than Sloot. Sloot can start, but she shouldn't have 20, 30 minutes. Like, you need to give that up to Burke and Fiebich. Even Marquisha Davis, you got to give her a chance. She also has speed, and she's a good defender.
Yeah, I mean, so. I feel like we've had that conversation before when it comes to like the bench and the role of Vandersloot. You know, I know it's difficult because, you know, Vandersloot, she's going through some tough time. You know, losing her mom. The fact that she's back so early after losing her mom. You know, that shows true character right here. But at the same time, you know, she's more towards the end of her career. And there were already questions last year as to whether it was a good idea to pair Sabrina and Vandersloot in the starting lineup. Mm-hmm. And so what we've seen so far since Vandersloot has been back is that she's starting the game, but she's not necessarily finishing the game. And Fiebich has been really the go-to player that has, you know, taken her spot. When it comes to finishing the game, which allows Sab to be back at the point guard position. Mm-hmm. Now, we saw again today that Sloot started the game and didn't really get a lot of playing time in the second half. I personally think, even though I think it's the intentions are good to have Sloot starting the game, get her going, her passing ability is still great. I mean, you know, there were people that are criticizing her in the Minnesota and Atlanta game, but to be fair, when I rewatched those games, she was pretty good. Like, you know, good passing ability still, attacking the basket. She had a couple of good defensive plays, you know, sticking to Kayla McBride. Had that nice block against Natisha Heidemann. So she could still provide, but I do believe that she would be better in the second unit. The way that Sab has taken over in her absence as the point guard position and the tandem with JJ. I think that helps JJ to get more in the game and not having, you know, those ups and downs like she had lately. You know, it's very frustrating for us fans to see someone of that caliber like Jonquel Jones, the former MVP, to get off the game like that.
Yeah.
Like at her level and experience, it should not happen. It should not happen for her to be out of the game because she doesn't, agree with the calls that, the ref are making. And so I think that having Sab as the main point guard will help her to be more involved offensively. So I do believe, I don't know if Sandy will make that decision, but I think that for me, I would put either Fiebich or KT in the starting lineup because they proved that they can play that role. And having Sloot coming from the bench, and eventually have someone like Sherrod, pairing Sherrod with Sloot, she will learn a lot from her. She won't necessarily have to have the ball handling, duties, but she could be that second guard where she could drive to the basket and then focus on defense. So we'll see what the Liberty are deciding to do when it comes to this. I don't know if they will make the adjustments. I know a lot of people are pushing for that. But, let's hope that they play with different mentality against Connecticut and Chicago to end this first part of the season well. And let's hope to see Sherrod bring some intensity on defense and get the crowd going on Thursday at the Barclays against Chicago. But thank you so much for your support once again. We're really grateful that you get to spend time with us listening about, the Liberty and their quest for a title. We'll cover, the back-to-back next week between the Liberty and the Connecticut Sun, and then the Liberty against the Chicago Sky. But until then, as we always say, Felicia,
let's go Liberty!